Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to have Dr. Sarah Myhill on today. And I've been following Dr. Sarah Myhill for quite some time. And I will let Dr. Sarah Myhill introduce herself. I'm just going to give little bit of a brief background on myself before Sarah introduces herself. My name is Kushmark, and I am the principal and founder of the New School of Nutritional Medicine. And I'm absolutely honoured to have Dr. Myhill here. So, and without further ado, Sarah, I'd love for you to just a little bit of an introduction. I have so many questions, so I have to hold back. And I know don't want to take too much of your time up, but if you just give us a bit of introduction about yourself.
Okay, well, I qualified in 1981 as a conventional doctor and then spent 20 years working in NHS general practice. But towards the end of those 20 years, I increasingly found that I didn't have the clinical freedoms that I needed to be a good doctor. There were some tests I were not allowed to ask for. There were nutritional supplements that I was no longer allowed to prescribe. I couldn't even recommend that my patients purchase them. In fact, towards the end of the 1990s, I got my wrists slapped because my prescribing budget was so low. I was prescribing so few drugs. So, of course, that made me a bad doctor, didn't it?
So your prescribing budget for, you mean medications?
Correct. My NHS prescribing was so low, because I prescribed so little, that I was obviously, a very bad doctor. So in the year 2000, I decided to go into independent medical practice, and that's what I've been doing ever since. And I come from the basic position, we have to ask the question why.
Yeah.
And that's what naturopathic nutritional medicine is all about. And in fact, that's how we should solve any problem. You first diagnose, are things going wrong? What's the mechanism by which they're going wrong? And if you understand the mechanisms, then that has obvious implications for management. And you can apply that to any medical condition whatsoever. But
Yeah.
during the 2000s, the big medical condition that was standing out that is so badly treated and so badly understood was chronic fatigue syndrome and ME. And so that's become my special area of interest, simply through demand. But the point here is that the interventions that we put in place to treat chronic fatigue syndrome and ME are also the starting point to treat and prevent absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Heart disease, cancer, dementia. So, at least I can say to my patients, okay, the regimes are difficult. I'm asking you to change your diet, to take these substances, to do detox regimes, to do difficult things. But this will stand you in very good stead in terms of your lifespan, the quality of your life, the quantity of your life, because you're not going to get heart disease, you're not going to get dementia, you're not going to get cancer. In fact, this morning I was having a conversation with a guy who I think I first saw in 2018, who was in severe heart failure.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, his left ventricular ejection fraction was 5%. It should be about 60 to 70%,
Yeah.
and you're considering heart failure if it drops to about 30%. So he should have been virtually dead then. And I was having a chat with him this morning. He is fit and well. He's walking, he's exercising, he's functioning at a high level, just with diet and supplements.
Yeah.
And he's on no prescription medication, and he never goes to see the cardiologist because he's well.
Yeah.
So
And
the power of naturopathic medicine is profound.
so just from what you're saying, because you make it sound really easy, because I think we're in a state now, especially like with social media, people are so overwhelmed with what do I do this for this protocol, for this condition, this for this for this. And what you're saying, and even, I love your book. I have to say that, this book I love mitochondria. And I was just saying to Sarah earlier on, the front cover. And when I saw that image, I thought, I have to get it because I've got the previous edition as well, but I much prefer this cover.
Bless you.
And I love it because it's actually when you go through the book, you have got it's like you've got the foundation, which is kind of your food, that's the fundamentals. And then you kind of build on top of that. And then you go through the different kind of, the systems you talk. I mean, you cover so much in the book. You go from the thyroid, the adrenals, the detoxing, but you're very clear that at the beginning it's the food.
Yeah, correct.
Getting
well from any illness, but particularly chronic fatigue syndrome, is like building a house. And the foundation stones of that house is the diet And that is the starting point. And in the early days, I would give people shopping lists of things to do, this diet and this supplement and this thyroid. And guess what? They would cherry pick the easy things.
Yeah.
And they'd come back and see me, how are you getting on? Oh, well, I've taken this supplement and that, but I haven't yet done the diet.
Yes.
And I'm afraid the diet is the foundation stone, and it's not as tough as people think it is. I run weekend training courses here at my home, and so people come on a Thursday night, and we feed them a paleo ketogenic diet. By Sunday, most of them are in ketosis, and guess what? None of them are hungry. They're all very pleased and satisfied with the gorgeous food that we dish up, and it's not as hard as people think it should be. It's difficult for many because they have become carbohydrate addicts, and sugars, in particular refined sugars and fruit sugars and carbohydrates, they are addictive, and people consume them in an addictive way. And we all know that when you give up addictions, whether it's smoking, alcohol, caffeine, whatever, it's difficult because you get cravings.
Yeah.
But that doesn't last forever. Usually, a week, 10 days, you get over that. And then you start to see real benefits and real improvements. So yes, you're absolutely right. The diet is fundamental.
And so, just from what you're saying, because I'm just thinking, because I don't have, I don't have sugar. It's been a bit of a journey. And it is challenging, and I've never drunk because I've grown up in a culture where women didn't drink in that. But then it was a choice, so I thankfully never liked it. But what I find really interesting, because sometimes, you open the fridge door, so look in the fridge door, and then you think, okay, why am I looking in the fridge door for? I'm not hungry. You should, and it's a habit as well. You sort of think, just something to do. And even this weekend, we've had I went to a yoga retreat weekend. So, and I want to make sure I do bring that up, is you talk about oxygen in your book as well. And we had in the morning, and it was vegan. Okay, so it's a particular yoga retreat. And I thought, oh my goodness, because the breakfast was I thought I'm going to struggle because it's quite carb heavy. But we had avocado, so I had quite a lot of avocado. And what was really interesting, I do think there is a point, because I was absolutely fine. Now, normally I'd probably experience a headache. And I thought, there is that stage, isn't there, where you kind of, once you've been doing it for a while, you do become metabolically kind of more flexible, right? Once you've kind of gone through that initial stage.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, our mitochondria, which supply energy for the body, can run on two fuels. It can run on sugars and carbs, but yes, it can run on ketones, which we get from eating fat and also from the fermentation of fiber in the large bowel.
Yeah.
And yes, a body that's well adapted can easily switch from one to another. But of course, when people have been running on carbohydrates all their life, and so many have been running on carbohydrates all their life, then suddenly it's something new. Suddenly the body's got to go into fat burning, and it doesn't like it. It objects. The body likes the status quo. But sugars and carbohydrates drive all modern Western pathologies, essentially. I mean, dementia is now being called type 3 diabetes. We know that people who are diabetics who are running high blood sugars all the time, they're at much greater risk of cancer, heart disease, and dementia. Why?
Yeah.
Because it's driven by sugar.
Yeah.
So, and as when I was working in Nottinghamshire and talking about this, one of my lovely Nottinghamshire patients looked into the distance and nodded wisely and said, "Yep," he said in his Nottinghamshire accents, which I can't really do. He said, "Sugar's the booger."
Yes. Yeah.
And that's absolutely right. It is so addictive. It's quick. It's easy. It gives us an instant kind of boost, but then that's followed by a downer. It's socially acceptable. Everybody does it. That is the difficult one.
So you probably now get clients, which is, probably what I've experienced of the last, I suppose more last decade, where initially it was difficult to get clients to sort of understand what sugar is doing, what the impact of sugar is. It's a lot harder. And then now they know that, okay, if I'm going to go and see Kush, that's going to be the first thing is food. But how, a lot of people will be listening to this and thinking, I'm sure it's not that bad, because it's just the same thing. Because in my culture as well, very much so, we've got some of my aunties, have got diabetes, and it's type 2 diabetes now. But what's shocking is they're also now on insulin.
Oh,
because to give up the sugar, to take responsibility and really understand the impact of our food, it's really kind of quite difficult to get that across.
absolutely. Dr. David Unwin, who's a GP up in Southport in Liverpool, he's now reversed 135 cases of type 2 diabetes off their medication, lost weight, slim, fit, functioning at a high level. He estimates he's saved, well, the NHS, I can't remember the actual figure, but tens of thousands of pounds, not
Yeah.
just on prescription drugs saved, but pathology prevented. Because
Yes.
having a heart attack or dementia is an extremely expensive illness because it's
Hmm.
care for life. And as I say, you may be aware of Patrick Holford's work, wonderful website, Food for the Brain.
Yeah.
Dementia is 99% preventable. And here it is, it's the commonest cause of death in women in this country today. And it's very easy. Low carbohydrate diet is key. Measure the homocysteine, very easy to do the do-it-yourself test, take fish oils. Those three things, and they have to be done in combination. There's no point just doing one or the other. It's
Yeah.
all three.
Yeah.
And dementia can then become a thing of the past.
And Sarah, so you've just again, just to go through that. So can you just explain a bit about homocysteine? So if, for the people who are listening, they might think, okay, fish oils, I get, okay, dementia type, calling it sort of diabetes or the blood sugar issue, but what's this homocysteine?
Okay. Homocysteine is an amino acid that's normally present in all our bodies. We can have too much and we can have too little. It's a marker of the methylation cycle.
Hmm.
And using the car analogy, which is the analogy I love to use, is methylation is our toolkit. That's how we heal and repair.
Hmm.
And if the methylation cycle is going slow, and the mark of that will be a high homocysteine, then we are unable to heal and repair the damage that we do every day. So just the business of being alive, talking, walking, getting around, we are damaging our tissues. And then we have a good night's sleep, during which time we heal and repair.
Yeah.
And then secondly, homocysteine is directly toxic to the brain in its own right. So, the level should lie within reference range, which I think should be between 5 and 10.
Hmm.
Now, the shameful thing is, if you went to see your GP, they wouldn't know what the homocysteine was.
Yeah.
It's a shameful state of affairs. We should all know what our homocysteine is because it is such a risk factor for disease and it runs in families. So, if you've got a bad family history of heart disease, cancer, dementia, people getting these conditions, at a young age or even at all,
Yeah.
then we should know our homocysteine. And if it's abnormal, we can easily fix it with a package of B vitamins.
Yeah.
And all first-degree relatives should be screened, as I say, because it runs in families. So it's such an easy test to do.
Yeah.
So you can get your own kit. Again, if you go to Patrick's website called Food for the Brain,
Hmm.
you can join his project if should you so wish, but you can purchase from there a do-it-yourself homocysteine kit. It costs 50 quid.
Yeah.
And know what your result is and know how to fix it. And you will be doing yourself a great service.
And I really appreciate that because, again, years ago, before I decided to, we were offered to move to the US, I was looking into studying nutritional therapy, and that's how I came across Patrick Holford. And it was really interesting because I'm thinking, wait there, all those years ago, spent I don't know how many years I spent in education, and we went through the Krebs cycle. And we did cover methylation, we did cover homocysteine, but no way did I ever connect it to health and well-being and what you're covering. And so taking that step back, why is it? So I do get, and clients will come and think, well, they can't get the homocysteine test on the NHS, but why? And it's an important marker for heart health, for cardiovascular health.
Absolutely.
But why do you think it's not provided rather than, getting tested for cholesterol and then generally prescribed statins? Why do we not look at homocysteine? What do you think needs to change as far as
Well, the problem is that medical education has been taken over by Big Pharma. Big Pharma's mantra is a patient cured is a customer lost.
yeah.
Their only responsibility is to their shareholders. They want to peddle as many drugs as they possibly can. And they have boiled conventional medicine down to simple algorithms. Symptom, drug, that's your answer. Another symptom, another. It's all about symptom suppression. Doctors are not looking for root causes of problems. And just to give that example you said today, if you have somebody with heart failure, their 50% mortality is about 2 years. So half of them will be dead in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because the drugs for heart failure do not address the root causes of it. They simply manage the symptoms. So they might trickle on a little bit longer than they otherwise would, but this is not curative. And this applies to the whole of medicine. So arthritis is treated with painkillers. Well, the problem with painkillers and anti-inflammatories is they also inhibit healing and repair.
Yeah.
And so people come to their joint replacements or surgery much sooner than if they had muddled on. And of course, there are nutrition interventions which we know can reverse arthritis.
Absolutely.
So this is the problem. Doctors are being educated by Big Pharma. They are in the grip of, I mean, even when I was at medical school in the 1970s, Big Pharma was then spending £20 per week per doctor on promotion and advertising. And you can be quite sure it's a lot more nowadays.
Yeah.
And the doctors do it because it's quick and easy. Somebody comes with a headache, here's a paracetamol, off you go. When I was in general practice, I might spend half an hour or an hour with that person, going through, the causes of their headache, the dietary changes, the magnesium, the lifestyle change or whatever. And then they go away and they would be cured and I wouldn't see them again. So the investment in time early on is greater, but in the long term, considerably less.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we live in such a toxic, polluted, complicated world. It takes longer to get people well. In the early 1980s, there'd only been a relatively recent move to a carbohydrate-based diet. I was brought up on the go to work on an egg, and my mum, it was it would always be bacon and sausage and egg and fried bread for breakfast, and that would keep us going all day.
Yeah.
Whereas now, as you know, breakfast always gives the game away because the carbohydrate addicts are maximally withdrawn after a night's sleep. And when they're going from their toast and their cereals and their fruit juice and their sweet drinks, they're complete sugar addicts.
Yeah.
And it takes longer to explain. So, a drug company in interview is very easy. Oh, you've got high cholesterol. Here's the statin. Off you go. Whereas if they came to see a doctor like yourself or like myself, then we want to know all the details about what they're eating, how much sleep they're getting, are they taking nutritional supplements, have they been poisoned in the past, what's gone on before. And it takes longer.
Yeah.
But intellectually, of course, far more satisfying. And the word doctor, of course, comes from the Latin. It means to teach. Yeah. And we should be teaching our patients what they have to do to fix themselves, and we have to teach them to become their own doctors, because guess what? Nobody's going to be more empowered, nobody's going to be more enthusiastic, nobody's going to be more in touch with the everyday symptoms and what does this and what does that and what changes than the person involved. Yeah. So I'd like to think of myself as a teacher more than a doctor these days.
Yeah. And Sarah, from and it's wonderful to speak to a doctor who's actually, what you've gone through, and like with the GMC and what it's astounding, and it's absolutely inspiring to see you still practicing and glowing and still passionate about what you're doing. Can you just share with us, with people who are listening, it's just a bit about your story about where, because some people might just know you for where you are today, but you have a story, you have an amazing journey, and to me it resonates so much because I can see when you sort of once you see something, you can't unsee it. Once you know that, wait there, why do I have this? Or why is this happening? And to actually ask a question in itself, it's taking responsibility. And also you took responsibility for your choices, for the lifestyle you have now. For example, being an NHS GP, you could eventually get a pension, whatever a pension is nowadays. You could have had that life, but you actually stepped out and you took, you made a big change. Can you just tell us a bit about this journey of yours, if that's okay with you?
As I say, I did 20 years in NHS general practice, no complaints, no concerns to the General Medical Council. As soon as I went independent, my view is that information should be freely available. So I put all my stuff up on a website, and as I learned, I've added to it and I've added to it and I've added to it. It's now had about 26 million hits or something.
Fantastic.
But that's when the complaints started coming in. Now, no patient has ever complained about me. But I always write to GPs to tell them what I'm doing, hopefully to educate them a little bit. And all the complaints to the GMC have either come from GPs who don't understand what I'm doing, or from health authorities, or from envious other health professionals, or from the GMC itself.
Yeah.
And the upshot now is I'm the most investigated doctor in the history of the General Medical Council.
No.
The present score is Myhill 38, GMC nil, with another 5 investigations outstanding. And they're coming for me because the GMC is now controlled by big pharma, by big food, and that's where all its investments are. So the General Medical Council itself is controlled by the Department of Health, by big pharma, and by big food. That's where their money is. And I'm quite sure that they have been told to attack the doctors who practice functional medicine or naturopathic medicine, because they are a big threat to big pharma. It's the old story, follow the money. And in fact, it's not just me. Many of my colleagues have been similarly attacked. And I now have about 12 doctors who I've been helping, all who have gone against the government narrative over various issues, whatever those issues may be. They've whistleblown on the medical profession.
Right.
And as a result, they are being investigated and being sanctioned. Now, it doesn't matter if I get struck off by the General Medical Council. Why? I've paid off my mortgage. My girls are grown up and independent. I would survive.
Yeah.
But for a young doctor, it is disaster.
Right.
Because if you get suspended, or if you even get investigated by the General Medical Council, you become unemployable within health authorities, unemployable within the NHS. You lose your job, your career, your reputation, everything.
Right.
So the young doctors have to conform. They dare not step outside, the restrictive practice imposed by the powers that be, big pharma, and the government narrative. Because if they do, they know they will suffer sanction. And they've got mortgages, they've got families, they've got young kids, they've got financial ties, and they daren't do that. So it's a parlous state of affairs that when doctors cannot express their opinions freely without fear of sanction.
And to be honest, Sarah, what you did was actually helping people. You were helping people.
Well, the General Medical Council don't care two hoots about that. In fact, I often do Freedom of Information Act searches of the GMC. And I found one comment by one of the GMC legal advisor, a QC called Mr. Tom Kark, where he put, the problem with the Myhill cases, the problem is that all the patients are better and none of them will complain about her. So, getting people well is obviously a bad thing to do.
Yeah. And so what would you say to, I've got a 21-year-old, a nearly 18-year-old, and, some of their friends are studying medicine. And what if they sort of, because food it's got to change. What the youngsters drink now and eat nowadays, it's just, and what is freely much cheaper than buying water it's shocking. And I can't see, and I'm not a pessimist at all, I'm an optimist. I just think, where are we going with health? What would you say, somebody who's listening to this and he's saying, okay, so with all what's going on, so how do I take control of my health?
That's the first thing you have to take control of your health. And you have to work it out for yourself from first principles, because you will not get the good advice from the doctors who are only interested in, say, symptom suppression with medication. And once you've made that psychological leap,
Sarah, can you just explain? You said symptom suppression with medication.
Correct. That's what doctors do. They don't address the root cause of problems. Any problem, we have to ask the question, why? Why have we got this symptom? Why have we got this issue? It's all about identifying the mechanisms of that. And once you've identified the mechanisms, then, is it allergy? Is it sugar addiction? Is it a microbiome problem? Is it a mitochondrial problem? Once you've identified the mechanisms, that has very obvious implications for management. Now, the symptom of medicine that I'm trying to espouse or promote is a mechanism whereby all the treatments are available to the man on the street. You know, you don't have to go to a doctor, you don't have to go to a consultant. You can purchase all these things necessary to make the difference, you know, from food shops, from markets, you know,
Yeah.
online vitamins and minerals, detox regime. It's all stuff you can do yourself. Because my experience is that when you go and consult a doctor, often they are obstructive. They say, oh, you know, they're arrogant. They pat you on the head and say, oh, don't worry your tiny little head with that. You know, we'll give you some statins and you'll be fine. You know, they don't encourage patients to take control of their own health. And very often they blame them. Oh, it's your fault because you're too fat. It's your fault because you're too lazy. You know, it's your fault because, you know, you're eating the wrong foods without telling them what foods they should be consuming. So, you know, you know, when things go wrong, they use the blame game. I never do the blame game. That's counterproductive. I just try to give people the confidence to know that they have all the tools at their disposal to sort themselves out. Yeah. So I see myself as an educator, giving people, as I call it, the rules of the game and the tools of the trade. And with those rules and with those tools, they can fix their own health problems.
Yeah. And it's also believing that actually, if you give your body the right tools, you know, you take charge, the body can heal.
Of course, and it wants to heal. You know, we've survived, you know, millions of years because we have incredible bodies with an incredible ability to heal and repair. And without that, we would never have survived. And it's the same throughout nature. You know, if you give any animal, you know, the raw materials, you know, the time to heal and repair, the rest to heal, of course they will, and they do.
Yeah. So just, I'm going to kind of jump in because I really do want to touch upon, one was you've got a chapter on oxygen and also mitochondria in your book. And I want to go into that just slightly because I just want to share this bit. When I trained initially, so my first degree was in pharmacology and biochemistry. And I remember we did all the biochemical pathways. And because I'm not training to be a doctor, a medical qualified doctor, it was actually something that we really had to learn because that was our major, was in pharmacology and biochemistry. And when we learned the Krebs cycle, I thought to myself, gosh, without this ATP, we are dead. Okay. Right. And I was in awe of the fact that we're sitting here now and we're producing this ATP all the time by these little tiny organelles. And then I, you know, did my master's and then even my PhD. Still, you know, the Krebs cycle is so important, I think. So the cancer research, Krebs cycle, ATP production, everywhere. And it wasn't until I went to the US and I started my nutrition course that I also heard Dr. Atkins was one of our lecturers. Actually, he's going, you have to turn the pyramid upside down. You know, he was really quite charismatic. And then suddenly, when they then taught the Krebs cycle, and they suddenly brought in the B vitamins, they brought the carbohydrates and the fatty, and I was thinking, wait there, that's food. Wait, then I was making before that, it was like over here, the Krebs cycle's here, the nucleus is over, nothing was connected. You know, nobody explained the big, and yet I spent how many years? And so I just want to, you know, I am fascinated by the mitochondria and also the oxygen. Of course, the mitochondria need oxygen. Can you just tell us a bit more about the mitochondria? Because, you know, you talk about, in your book, you cover thyroid, you cover the adrenals, which I'm really also passionate, because I think, you know, nowadays, especially I think with women as they go through, you know, the whole thing now with HRT and women going through the change, you know, sometimes it does unmask that underneath is a hyperthyroid thing. You know, it's all connected, and you explain it really beautifully in the book. But can you just tell us, you know, share a bit about the mitochondria and
okay, well, a very quick analogy to put the mitochondria in context for people listening is the analogy I love to use is the car analogy. Yep. And for your car to go, you've got to have the right fuel in the tank, and that's all about the diet that we've talked about. You've got to have some oxygen because you can't burn, you know, you can't burn fuel in the presence. You've got to have some oxygen to burn the fuel. Then we need the mitochondrial engine.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the thyroid accelerator pedal and the adrenal gearbox. Now, the central thing of all this, of course, are the mitochondria. You know, they are the engines. And with, as you rightly point out, energy is the difference between life and death. If you haven't got ATP, you are dead. It's as simple as that. So we then have to ask the question, you know, well, how do mitochondria go? And the first thing, of course, they've got to have the right fuel in the tank, and the preferred fuel of mitochondria are ketones. Well, we've done that because we've touched on the PK diet. Then they need some raw materials in order to be able to function. They need lots of raw materials, but there are 5 common rate limiting steps. And we know this through the work of Stephen Sinatra, consultant cardiologist. and also through my own researches that I did in conjunction with Dr. John McLaren Howard from Acumen Laboratories. And essentially what we demonstrated is that those people who have the worst fatigue have the worst mitochondrial function, and vice versa. And as part of those tests, John was measuring levels of ATP, of magnesium, of CoQ10, of acetyl L-carnitine, of vitamin B3, all these things, to see if there were deficiencies. And guess what? Yes, of course there were deficiencies. And Stephen Sinatra talks about his awesome foursome. I've actually talked about an awesome fivesome, the key micronutrient deficiencies that we need to correct mitochondrial function, which are all detailed in the book. And then mitochondria can be going slow because they are blocked by something. There's inhibitors getting in the way. And again, John McLaren Howard did these fantastic tests on mitochondria, looking at what makes them go slow, either because of their effects on oxidative phosphorylation or their effects on translocator protein. Translocator protein is the mechanism by which ATP gets from mitochondria through the mitochondrial membrane into the cell where it's needed to do a job. And having done its job that entails energy, the molecule ADP, the waste product, if you like, is then picked up by translocator protein and flicked back into mitochondria. Now, mitochondrial membranes are 80% comprised of translocator protein. And if those membranes are blocked by anything, then that will go slow. So John developed translocator protein function test and also a test of oxidative phosphorylation. The number one blocker that came up out of all others is lactic acid. Now, again, lactic acid is, of course, what we produce when we get energy from anaerobic metabolism, metabolism without mitochondria. In fact, at any one moment, about 10% of our energy, or rather up to 10% of our energy, is coming from anaerobic metabolism. And anaerobic metabolism produces lactic acid. And my guess, and it is only a guess at this stage, is that is a natural brake on mitochondria. It stops them going whirling around so fast that they literally run out of fuel and run out of raw materials. So it controls our mitochondrial function to a certain extent. Now, the point here is that, we have a certain bucket of energy to spend in a day. If we spend more energy than is available, then we will die. So to control our mitochondrial function is a really vital part of survival. And it's my guess that this is what lactic acid does. And when mitochondria go slow, we switch into anaerobic metabolism, produce lactic acid, and they go even slower. It's to protect ourselves. So the point here is the first rule for anybody with the fatigue syndrome is to pace your activity so that you're not getting post-exertional malaise. Now, we are all on this scale. This applies to you as well as to me, as well as to people with fatigue syndrome. It also applies to top athletes. If you spend more energy than you have available, you will pay for it the next day. The athletes call it overtraining, and it results in worse athletic performance. I'm very lucky. I work hard on my energy and keeping it good. And, yes, I get a lot done in the day, but I have a good night's sleep, and I'm as right as rain the next morning when I wake up. But if I wake up tired and exhausted, I know I've overdone things and I need to pace my activity better or work harder energy delivery mechanisms. So pacing for my fatigue syndrome patients is absolutely vital. Other things that can block mitochondria, well, another major cause of blocking are products from the upper fermenting gut. Now, this is another huge subject. It's another one of my favorite subjects. In a nutshell, the gut, which is about 30 foot long between the mouth and your tail end, the first 20, 25 odd foot of it should be sterile or near sterile. That's the purposes of digesting protein and fat. Now, it's only the last 5 foot of bowel where the microbiome is that it's teeming with friendly microbes that ferment fiber. But the problem with carbohydrate-based diets is if you're eating sugars all the time, carbohydrates all the time, and you're not intermittent fasting, the stomach has got something there all the time. You overwhelm the ability of the gut to become sterile, and it starts to ferment. And if the upper gut ferments, and we call this small bowel bacterial overgrowth, we call it candida, we call it parasites, we've got lots of names for it. If we start to ferment, then we produce a whole load of nasty toxins. So if you've got yeast in our upper gut, that will ferment sugar to produce alcohol. We all know that. That's how we make wine and beer. But if somebody said to me, you've got to drink a glass of wine before you start your day's work, guess what? Nothing would get done. Why? Because alcohol inhibits mitochondrial function. It also probably through destabilizing membranes. But it's not just alcohol that we've produced. We produce D-lactate, hydrogen sulfide, amino alkyl compounds, propyl alcohols, methyl alcohols, a whole range of other toxins, all of which inhibit mitochondrial function and give us foggy brains. So sorting out the upper fermenting gut is important so that mitochondria are not inhibited. And then mitochondria can also go slow because they are poisoned by heavy metals, by volatile organic compounds, by pesticides, etc., by heavy metals, by a whole range of things. So that's where detox regimes are often very helpful. And then, of course, the mitochondria have got to be controlled by something. So we have, as I called it, the thyroid accelerator pedal, and the underactive thyroid is very common, and the adrenal gearbox. So that allows mitochondria to gear up in response to stress. So, if I was trotting through the jungle 10,000 years ago and a saber-toothed tiger rat jumped out at me, I would have to run the fastest mile I'd ever run in my life, or I would become breakfast. So, but we can't do that all the time. We can't function at that high level, 24/7. So we have to gear up for that, and then we have to gear back down again. And the adrenal gland is responsible for that.
Yeah.
So, I've tried to give you in a nutshell all about.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's, you've touched upon the gut, which is, the gateway. I said, if your gut is all letting everything through, you've got a lot of work going on there. You've talked about food, the gut, and then we've talked about thyroid and adrenals, and then the oxygen. So what you've gone through yourself, like, working, your children are grown up, you live in Wales now. How would you say, how have you managed all this that you've gone through? Because it just sounds like you've gone through a lot of, stress as well. How do you look after your health? What is it? What tip would you give to somebody who's listening and say, okay, it's all good and well, right? I'll change my diet, I'll do this. What else could you recommend that has worked for you that you would suggest? Because, one of the biggest things for me is looking at my parents, and I've got clients who book in their parents because their parents are now getting elderly. They might have a fall, or they've got, sort of the early signs of dementia. And to change nutrition is challenging because, I think it's difficult. But what would you say now as a prevention? Food, yes, what you mentioned. What about how do you improve your oxygen? How do you, what about other lifestyle things that you do for yourself that help you?
Well, as I say, the paleo-ketogenic diet is a no-brainer. We have to do that. And then
I'm just going to say, Sarah, because we haven't really talked. So in your book, Sarah talks about the paleo-ketogenic diet. Just in case anybody's thinking, well, what's that? Is that paleo? Is that keto? What is it? And you go into detail about that, which is wonderful. So I just wanted to add that just in case.
But because of modern agriculture and how we live, we all need a basic package of supplements because we simply don't have the goodness in food that should be there. And in conjunction with that, we tend to live our lives indoors, and we are lacking. We're all sunshine deficient. And one of the most important aspects of sunshine is vitamin D synthesis. So the bottom line is we should all be taking a good multivitamin, a good multi-mineral complex, and there are several on offer. Some fish oil, because deficiencies in omega-3 are very common. Vitamin D, 10,000 international units, which is about what we would get from maybe half an hour of sunbathing. And guess what? Primitive woman would have had 12 hours, wouldn't she? And then we should all take a dose of vitamin C, because it's humans, fruit bats, and guinea pigs that cannot make their own vitamin C. So the reason my little dog, Nancy, doesn't get scurvy from eating a pure meat diet is she can make her own vitamin C. So can my horse, so can those sheep, so can those cows. And humans lost that ability, some millions of years ago. And we cannot get sufficient vitamin C from our diet for optimal health. My view, we should all slowly build up and aim for about 5 grams a day, which is about a teaspoon of ascorbic acid. That's vital. So then let's get on to oxygen. I know you, and of course, oxygen is vital for our mitochondrial engines. You know, we need oxygen to burn fuel, don't we?
Yeah.
Now, the way we get oxygen to our mitochondria is we inhale it through our lungs. And in the lungs, oxygen hops onto hemoglobin, which is on red blood cells.
Yeah.
And then the red blood cell is, you know, transported around the body until it comes to mitochondria. And when it finds a mitochondria that needs oxygen, the oxygen hops off to the mitochondria. But we have to ask the very difficult question: how does oxygen know to jump onto hemoglobin in the lungs, but jump off it when it gets to mitochondria?
Yeah.
Because it would be a disaster if it was the other way around. We'd be dead, you know, in a few
Absolutely.
seconds. And the answer is carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
Now, carbon dioxide dissolves in the bloodstream to a weak carbonic acid.
Yeah.
So if mitochondria are busy, you know, working hard, they're generating carbon dioxide, aren't they? And therefore the blood is acidic. And if the blood is acidic, then oxygen jumps off hemoglobin in order to supply that mitochondria. Now, of course, in the lungs, the reverse is the case. And in the lungs, the blood arrives there and it's full of carbon dioxide. That diffuses out, so we exhale it, and the blood becomes more alkali.
Mm-hmm.
And in the alkaline environment of the lungs, oxygen sticks to hemoglobin.
Yeah.
So it's that, you know, that's that acidity that allows oxygen to do the right thing in the right place. Now, this can become a problem if people hyperventilate, if they overbreathe, if they breathe too much, they wash out too much carbon dioxide out from the blood. The blood becomes too alkali, and therefore oxygen gets stuck onto hemoglobin. You cannot get the oxygen from the hemoglobin to where it's needed.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that is when you do pulse oximetry, that is not measuring oxygen delivery to mitochondria, it's measuring oxygen stuck onto hemoglobin. So somebody could be 100% saturated with oxygen, but it's not getting to where it's needed. So, and this is a class, I mean, people who have acute asthma attacks, you know, they're hyperventilating. And the powers that be think all is well because their oxygen is saturated, but, you know, they're hyperventilating, it can't get, you know, they are in trouble. So learning breathing techniques, and there are so many ways we can do that through yoga, through relaxation techniques, through meditations. Very often it's all about slowing the breathing down because we hyperventilate. That is driven by stress, and the stress hormone is adrenaline, and we're living stressed lives. When your blood sugars are wobbling around because you're on a carb-based diet, every time your blood sugar goes up, you produce insulin. Then as the blood sugar falls, you generate adrenaline. And so many people find them in an adrenaline-driven state that they're chronically hyperventilating, they're overbreathing. And that means energy delivery mechanisms are getting worse. It's a real vicious cycle. So yeah, breathing is really important.
Yeah, and that's so, and thank you for that, because that's such a clear explanation. Because sometimes, you know, when you say, and, you know, do some breathing, or make sure, you know, just sit down and you sort of feel, where are you breathing from? And most people are breathing from up here, you know, and you feel like you're just, they're like, did I really pay you for that? Just to tell me, you know? And but it's true. But because you've described it, you explain it. Because I know in my head, you know, yes, the oxygen is important. It's got to get to the mitochondria, blah, 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 blah. But actually, when a client, I've had clients, you know, I've had a couple of clients say, they said, I can't believe I've just paid you for this. And I'm like, well, you know what? Did you know that before then? But it's really difficult because it's explaining that it's not just about the pill, you know. So okay, they don't want the medication. They may want a supplement. And that's not, so it's really working fundamentals and then moving upwards. I really appreciate that. I was going to say anything else, because you've got, I mean, I've got the, you know, you've got a Green Mother book, which I have as well. You've got so many books that you've written. You've written one on the thyroid. Anything that you feel like our listeners, it's important for them to know? You've shared a lot and I really appreciate it. And there's a lot more in your book. And I do this with most of my books that I really enjoy, because there's lots of information there. Is there anything else? I mean, because I was thinking, what about, you know, like somebody who's, you know, going to be a mum or a new mother, and, you know, I think nowadays it's a different world too. Even my boys are 21, 17, nearly 18, and it's different now to what it was for me. Any recommendations, like, you know, how can they raise a child that is healthy and well, especially in this era. Because, you know, we talk about breathing, talk about meditation. All they're doing is scrolling. You know, you look at the
I know.
teenagers, it's
I
it's a
know.
bit, I'm not saying they all do that, but it's quite disheartening sometimes.
I know.
Any tips for new mums or mums to be?
Well, I always hate to give tips because people just go away with that tip. Oh, I'll just do that then. You know, the most important thing is to work it out for yourself from first principles. And if you really want to, you know, be healthy, raise a healthy child, there is no shortcut. There is no easy way. We have been sucked into this, the way of life of modern life, which is, you know, very seductive, you know, entertaining, you know, stimulating and all that. But we're losing much of our grassroots, as I call it. We're losing,
Mm,
you know, the family life. We're losing, you know. I mean, the most important moment of the day is the evening. Is sitting around the evening meal, eating the best food you can possibly have,
mm,
you know, with your family, talking about the events of the day, chatting about plans. You know, because we are sociable beings.
absolutely.
So, you know, I'd hate to give, you know, oh, you just take this or just do that. I do see we have to do things one at a time. I'm a great fan of Michael Mosley and his, you know, just one thing. I think lectures
Yeah.
are lovely because, you know, they do allow you to do a little bite-sized chunk to move things on. But, you know, it really is, as I say to all my patients, this is not a battle, it's a war. It's a war you have to fight for life. And it's a war that's getting harder and harder to fight because we live in an increasingly toxic and more difficult world. But
Mm,
that's the way forward. And like you, I do despair for the next generation. I
mm,
mean, this has always been the case. You know, if you read Samuel Pepys's diary from, you know, from the 17th century, you know, he too despaired for the next generation. But you know, the next generation coming along were essentially healthy. They had, you know, good organic food, good water. They were physically active, lots of sunshine, dee-da, dee-da, dee-da. But nowadays, I think that children are so hamstrung by their poor quality diets, the lack of micronutrients, the toxic world in which they live. And as you say, you know, the electronic devices. In fact, there's now a new word for that. It's called digital dementia. And you know, people are losing the art of social intercourse, of social interactions, because all they can manage is to look at their screens and they're looking for the next like. And that too is addictive, and that too generates adrenaline and will make all the things we've talked about much worse.
mm.
So I would love to be able to give you a tip, say, yep, just take this.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
just ain't like that. And
Yeah.
I don't want people to think, oh, I just have to do that and
Sure.
I'm home and dry. It really is the whole package. And no, you can't do it overnight. No, Rome was not built in a day, but always start with that. And you know, one of the reasons I love to do these podcasts, do books, have my website, is because people don't have the resources to pay for, you know, an expensive therapist. And what I want them to do is spend their money on the best food they can possibly access.
Yeah.
The best quality food, ideally organic if you can stretch to that as well. You know, I'm very lucky. I'm a keen gardener, so you know, I pretty much everything I eat is grown from here. I've got my own chickens, my own
Fantastic.
pigs, and so on. But I do realize I'm in a very privileged position to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But you know, invest the energy and the money you've got in securing the best possible food you can get your hands on.
Yeah. So best possible food, sunshine, breathing, and of
Sleep.
course, I mean, sleep. And you also, and you're spending, you said you've got your dog, your animals, your horses. So do you
Yes.
horse ride or you look after horses?
Yes. No. 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 I'm a keen horse rider. I used to do a lot of. I used to be a jockey in
Oh,
point to
wow.
points and team chasing. After I broke my neck for the third occasion, I thought I'd better give this up.
Oh.
So you know, so yeah, I've been an adrenaline junkie in my time,
Yeah.
and I still do things. And I live in a tribe, so my daughters have one lives in Paris, the other lives in Brighton. So I have a tribe, so I have a very sociable life. In fact, I'll just
Fantastic.
give you an example. There's an old boy I look after. He came to me 7 years ago. He lives in my granny flat. Of course, I feed him.
Yeah.
So he has a paleo-ketogenic diet. And in July, we'll celebrate his 102nd birthday. Now, he is as
Fantastic.
sharp as a tack. There's no hint of dementia. He has no pathology. He's got a good heart, no cancer, and he goes off for a little walk every day, and he functions at a very high level. So the point being is, you know, we can improve our lives in
Giving
terms
me
of quality and
goosebumps.
quantity by putting all this stuff in place.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. That's beautiful. Well, look, I just want to say thank you very much, Sarah, for your time and all your generous education and information. And yeah, I'm hoping that, I'll keep going through your book. It's going to take, there's a lot of information there. So anybody's interested, I'm going to pull it up again, the wonderful front cover.
Thank you.
And so, there's a lot of information in there, lots to cover. And I really appreciate it because you just jumped on, emailed you last week and you jumped on and said, yeah, I'm available so and so. And that's really appreciated. So
My
thank you
pleasure.
so much.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you.